It's Triple Crown here, day 5 of the National, Sunday, July 28th, 2024. Look how empty it is. This is about 8 a.m. before dealers are able to get into the building. In just a moment here, you're going to see what the show floor looked like a little bit before noon Eastern time in Cleveland. Now, I didn't pick up too much or even try to negotiate on a lot of things here on day 5, so a lot of this will just be me talking about the experience and talking about things that I didn't get to touch on the previous 4 parts of the vlog, but I'll splice in a few clips here and there of some of the things that I did talk about with dealers on day 5, trying to pick up some cards. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right, this showcase is kind of an idea of what things looked like on Sunday for most. Is this dealer's inventory picked over? Definitely. Are there still some really good cards left? Absolutely. Are there going to be some empty spots in the showcases? Yeah, pretty much. And that is because these guys have really run out of things to put out. I talked to a lot of dealers who had empty spots in their showcases because they had sold everything. Even after restocking their case 4, 5, 6 times, they blew through so many cards in this whole entire week that they ran out of space, which is kind of nuts because a lot of these guys come fully loaded for the National. They have plenty of cards to stock their cases, and even they were struggling to find things to put out, taking $10 cards out of their value boxes and putting them in their showcases at the end just so that they didn't have blank spots. That's how good it was for the dealers. Not a single one told me that they had a bad show because I asked around a lot on Saturday and Sunday when it was time to, start reflecting a little bit. In fact, a lot of them told me that this was the best show they ever had. I would say more people than not had told me that. We're not talking about guys who have only been doing it for 6 months or a year. We're not even talking about guys who have been doing it like me for almost 5 years now. These are guys who have decades of experience doing shows. They've been to the National countless times. This was their best one. Not 2021 in the midst of the boom. Not back in the 90s. It was this one here, 2024 in Cleveland. Let that sink in, because that to me says a lot about the state of things right now. In terms of Sunday discounts, I didn't really find too many, and that was kind of one of my things that I was hoping for. I am definitely glad that I hit up the trade night the night before, because if I was banking on Sunday to make my last minute moves, that was not going to be the case, because I think a lot of the dealers were pretty content with how they did. Like I said, a lot of them had record shows, and there was definitely less urgency, generally speaking, for dealers to kind of take back less cards with them because they had already sold so much. A lot of value boxes are normally discounted on Sunday. I maybe only saw 2 or 3 value boxes that had any kind of signage that showed any kind of Sunday special. Just walking around, watching people negotiate on cards. Really no urgency for dealers to move things out of their showcases. They were perfectly content with taking what had remained back home with them. And again, a large part of that is because they had done so well throughout the week. Really, I'm rooting for these dealers. I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But I'm glad that they had such a good show because a lot of them put a lot of work into it. I will say one gripe that I do have. You'll see those tarps next to me because the table that is next to this guy is no longer set up. There is a guy who has his stuff there trying to also pack up to leave. And as someone who's a prospective dealer at the National who would do anything to set up and try their hardest to this year, it is very frustrating to me to see all these empty showcases and unused table space on Sunday, because if you told me I can go and set up and the only day I could do it is Sunday, I would do whatever it would take to have that opportunity to do that. And it's unfortunate to me to see that space go to waste, especially when I know there's other people like me who feel the same way, where if you gave me that opportunity, I would do everything I could to make the National proud and make sure that I was using that space to the best of my ability and for all the people attending there. It's also kind of disappointing to see that when you have a booth like Probstein that had kind of packed up early. They had like one guy there, no cards in their glass display case, and very limited signage there. When those kind of guys are given that kind of space, nothing against Probstein personally, but when they're given that kind of space and it kind of goes to waste towards the end, that to me is also pretty disheartening. Not just from my perspective, but also for guys and gals going to attend this show. Think about it. If you could only attend on Sunday and the room was half empty and a lot of dealers had already packed up their stuff with no motivation to sell things, you'd probably be pretty disheartened. And for some people, Sunday's the only day that they can go. But I feel like sometimes that kind of crowd is overlooked, and I guess there's not much you can do about it. All right, Let me show you a clip because I've been talking for a while.
Want to say it? I can do it. I have something you might like.
These?
I have one of these.
Ungraded.
It is.
How much is it?
I've got 45 on it.
4,500?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it was graded, I'd be interested. I don't do ungraded treasures. It's fantastic patch though.
Yeah. I figured you'd be the guy to ask.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about getting a graded, or you just don't do the grading thing?
I mean, I do, but like you can see the top edge. Like it's not. It wouldn't grade out well to me. It's.
Yeah.
Do you only do 10s or do you look at 9s?
I would be 9s too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a 9, it's just not with me.
Okay.
I'll
give you a card.
Yeah, for sure.
This is one of the things I set off to do, was to try to sell this Jared Goff RPA to PSA Al, who is one of the nicest people I met all weekend. This was my first time meeting him. I've definitely seen his cases around before, and most of you who have been to the National any number of times have probably seen Al's cases as well. He has some of the nicest ultra-modern football cards you will find at any show. But we couldn't strike a deal on this one here. He was only interested in graded ones, but I get his card, I get his contact information, and networking is such a big part of this show. You know, I'm able to introduce him, shake my hand, and although there's no deal here, perhaps, you know, we built this relationship for the future. Let's talk a little bit about the ultra-modern football, shall we, since I just showed off a really nice ultra-modern football case. Before the National, I predicted that there would be a bit of a stalemate. There would be a lot of people looking for football stuff, and in turn, there was going to be such a high demand, but dealers were going to be really high on their prices. I would say that I was partially correct. There were a lot of people who at the show were frustrated that they couldn't get anything, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they couldn't get it at this 80 to 85% number that they so desperately want to try to buy it at, which a lot of us want to try to buy it at. But if there's that much demand, when someone says that they're willing to pay 90% or 95% or even 100% or just pay whatever is on the sticker and throw this whole percentage game out the window, well, all of a sudden that takes away a lot of the power from people looking to pay this certain amount. And I'll go into that a little bit more as just kind of a general thought on the flipping culture at the show. But that was the case at this show, is that a lot of cards that I would walk around and see, I'd make a mental note of, and I'd come back around, they were gone. I would look to make sure that they weren't moved to a different showcase or whatever. Nope, they were gone. Some of them were at prices where I didn't even feel comfortable starting my negotiation, but someone was willing to pay that price for that card. And that's what it ultimately boils down to, is that you're not guaranteed that you'll get the exact same last sale when you go to sell a card. You may get more or you may get less. Yeah, a card is only worth what someone is willing to pay. And at this show, there were a lot of people willing to pay very high amounts for a lot of different cards, which is good to see. I'm all for this. And why I'm all for it is because it creates a healthier hobby. It helps preserve the values of things rather than people constantly just undercutting each other by trying to buy it at 80 to 90% of whatever the last one had sold for. Because as that happens, if everyone buys it at 80 to 90% of the last one, then every single card will constantly move towards zero if nobody is willing to pay more. This promotes a very healthy hobby ecosystem, and I'm glad that a lot of these dealers were able to get their number on these cards. Now, this wasn't the case for everything. There were some things that were, in my opinion, overpriced that just didn't move. And, you know, if those cards didn't move at the National, then I think those dealers will have to take a look and try to reassess. You know, maybe they didn't find the right buyer for it, or maybe perhaps their price is too high on it. That'll be up for them to decide here as they head into the fall. But for the most part, pricing-wise, I would say that this show was a lot better than any of the previous National shows I have been to. Just looking around and seeing things, there were very few tables where I thought everything was grossly overpriced. Not everything was at 90% of the last sale, but there were a lot of things that were very reasonable. And I got to say hats off to a lot of the dealers there, because they came with their cards priced pretty reasonably, and a lot of them had great shows because of it. This was my lone purchase of day 5 of the National. Really what I was doing on Sunday was getting a vibe check walking around. Which dealers were going to be motivated to sell things, which ones didn't want to take as much stuff home with them, which ones really didn't care. They were ready to go home at whatever point. They were perfectly content with how they had done throughout the entire weekend. This particular dealer here seemed a little bit more motivated than some of the other guys I was talking to or kind of feeling out. And because of that, I'm going to go ahead and see what I can find here. Now, the other part of my strategy is going to be trying to find stones that have been unturned. I know what a lot of the flipper guys are going to be looking for. I know what a lot of people have probably been asking about from what I've observed so far. So I'm going to try to look at some cards that maybe they haven't asked about, maybe find some things that look out of place in certain showcases. This guy doesn't have prices on the front for 99% of his inventory here. That may have deterred some people from asking about things. It's not as organized of a case, which is not a knock on him, but I'm just saying that, you know, without as much of an order to things, that may also cause people to miss stuff. And I'm also going to be looking for non-PSA slabs. I'm looking for cards in Beckett slabs, SGC slabs, CGC slabs, because a lot of times people will only look at something great if it's in a PSA slab, and I don't mind experimenting with other companies. It doesn't all have to be PSA for me. Because of that, I'm hoping to maybe find something like that in these cases here. Let's see what he's got. Let's see if I can build a stack and at least walk away with something.
Thank you.
Let's go.
What's on?
What do you have on the Steve Smith up there, the helmet card?
$75.
And how about Derrick Henry?
Do Derrick Henry out of 10. I'll do 400.
Is that second year?
No, rookie.
Rookie year?
Well, look
Yeah, I'll take one. Thank you.
400. The one with the drawing, I'm doing.
What do you have on the mica down there, that ice?
The blue ice. It's out of 15. I need 275.
Okay. How about the watt? The tricolor select?
Watt, 150.
And then the bubbles, what do you call it? Atoms, that's down there too.
Doubles, Adams.
The bubbles one, this one out of 99.
Oh, Devontae Adams?
Yeah.
Do 150 on that.
Okay.
I was kind of just getting the sniff test on a lot of those cards where he would throw me out his number on them and I can kind of tell in my head, all right, that's going to be something I'm interested in at that number. That's a card that I'll pass at that number. For example, that Adams card, not as interested at his asking price. The Micah Parsons, I feel like that's a really good price, so I'm definitely going to be interested in that. He ends up pulling out all the cards for me, and then you can hear his phone ringing there. He ends up taking a phone call. And while I wasn't planning on looking up the cards initially, I decided, you know what, my internet connection's good enough at this point. Since he's going to be on the phone anyways, I might as well look up a couple of these cards and also maybe take a look at some other things in the case that catch my eye upon second glance.
$5 a piece. Okay. Really Sunday, I'll try to sell a little more of that extra stuff, so it's fun.
How about Adams and Stafford up there too?
And Stafford, I need 150 on that.
Okay, I'm good on that one.
Yeah.
I'm good on more than I would want for a Steve Smith auto.
Yeah. Should probably do 50 bucks.
Yeah, at 50, yeah, I'll take it at 50.
Yeah, there's only one listed at nothing, so there's only one listed at 260. Do 200 bucks on it.
Okay. I'll do these two with Micah and Stafford. We call it 750. That ice Micah? Yeah.
800 bucks. You said these three and the Micah. Yeah, I'll do 800.
What about just 300 for just Smith and Micah?
Smith and Micah, 300. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
thank you.
No problem.
750 was more than I really wanted to even be at, so when he came back at 800, I knew that I was going to have to take some things out of the deal. Now, normally my solution to this would be to add more, but in this case, I knew his individual prices on each of those cards, and it allowed me to kind of identify which ones I was comfortable with and which ones I wasn't. In this case, I was really happy with that Micah and that Steve Smith. The other two autographs, I was not, and that's why I decided to take them out of the deal. Sometimes adding more can help you get a better price, but sometimes you end up just hurting yourself, and it's better to back away. Even though you might not get as much of a discount on getting fewer cards as opposed to building up a bigger stack, it might be more efficient overall just to take the smaller stack like I did here. I want to touch on some of the things that were the most complained about, specifically the long lines for anything that could potentially have a line. The bathrooms, the food trucks inside of the facility, the actual facility itself to get in, whether it be the line to get into the doors or the line to get into even the parking lot to park, especially on some of the earlier days in the week. Look, I think that the National expected a large crowd. I don't know if they expected a crowd this large. This is what happens when the hobby grows, is that there's going to be some things that you like, there's going to be some things that you don't like. It's part of it. You know, I hear all the time like, oh, let's grow the hobby, let's grow the hobby. Well, be careful what you wish for sometimes, because this is going to be the part of it. You know, you want to share the national experience with more people in the hobby. It means that some of these facilities aren't going to be as well equipped to handle a lot of these issues that are going to be posed with more people coming in than ever before. I spoke to a lot of people that told me that this was their first national, and I hope that the long lines for things didn't sour their experience. I know that they were annoying at times, trust me. I was annoyed by them too, but it is what it is. Like I said, there's a lot of people there, and I think they handled it probably about as good as they could have. In hindsight, there's a lot of things that could have been done differently, but a lot of those issues I think will be resolved simply by going back to Chicago in the next 3 years. Now, should the National move again in 2028 out of Chicago into a different venue, I think 2024 in Cleveland is a very good learning experience for the National Committee on what they'll need out of a potential venue for 2028, and also what they're going to need to do to prepare for those crowds then. Who knows what things will look like in 4 years from now? It could be very different from now. I mean, if I told you back in 2018, this is what the National would look like next time we came back to Cleveland, you'd probably think I was crazy. But here we are, and that's the way things are now. So we'll see what happens. But overall, you know, were these things annoying? Yes. Could they have been handled better? Yes. But it wasn't a total disaster, I think, as some people have catastrophized it to be. At least that's just my opinion on it. All right, here's my aforementioned rant that I mentioned in the title, and I'll leave a timestamp in the comments if someone wants to skip directly to this part to hear what I have to rant about. But I'll start off by saying this. This is the National Sports Collectors Convention, and while each of those words carries its own significance and how it ties into the entire event, I want to point out that none of those 4 words, including 2 that actually start with the letter C, stand for cards. Now, is this the world's largest card show? You better believe it is. In fact, if you ask most of the people that walk through the metaphorical gate throughout the entire week, I would venture to say that most of them were there for the cards. In fact, some of those people are exclusively there for the cards. But that doesn't mean that the other aspects of the National should not exist. And what do I mean by that? Take, for example, the autograph pavilion. That is, for some people, their main motivation for going. They want to get pieces signed, that this is their only opportunity every single year to get these items signed. Whether it's they don't want to put these things in the mail system, whether it's because they want to personally witness the items being signed, or even meet the athletes, take photos with them. In some cases, people are meeting their childhood heroes. That to me is really cool. Now, I've never partaken in the autograph pavilion. It's just not for me. But I can appreciate it being there for those where it is a big part of their National. Some of my really close friends, some of the highlight of their Nationals has been what they have gotten signed at the autograph pavilion. It's a part of their show, and I can respect that and appreciate that it's there for them. In addition to the items that might get signed there that aren't necessarily cards, there's signed and game used relics of the past all throughout the show floor. And I'm not talking about the relics that are not from any specific game, event, or season. I'm talking about actual game used jerseys, bats, balls, helmets, things that you don't see everywhere else. And proportionate to the amount of cards that are on the show floor, I would argue that those items don't overstay their welcome. They are there for the people that they appeal to. And there are people who do collect that kind of stuff. I personally used to be a big signed baseball guy back in the day. I've kind of grown out of it. It's not really my thing anymore. But there are a lot of people out there who collect autographed baseballs. And I saw a complaint that there was, a table that had exclusively autographed baseballs. I can tell you right now, people wouldn't bring out the autographed baseballs if nobody was interested in them. Just because you're not interested in them doesn't mean that other people are not interested in them. Let's talk more about the actual cards themselves. There were some non-sports cards there. Again, proportionate to the amount of sports cards on the show floor, I don't think they overstayed their welcome. And there's also quite a bit of overlap between those who collect sports and non-sports cards. One of my good friends who's a sports card collector found some non-sports stuff that he really liked, and that was one of his biggest pickups of the entire show, and he absolutely loves it, and I was very happy for him. It wasn't necessarily something that appealed to me, but I can appreciate that it appealed to him. And conversely, there was also things such as Pokemon there. And the Pokemon vendors, they do a really great job because there's a lot of kids interested in Pokemon. Maybe kids are brought along to the show with a parent. They're not as interested in some of the sports cards, but they might be interested in the Pokemon. It's something that's there for them. And there's adults too that enjoy it as well. I'm not acting like it's exclusively a kids thing. And while that wasn't for me, I've dabbled in some Pokemon here and there. I can appreciate that that was there for those that it does appeal to. Because for some people, that was some of the main things that they were looking for, was Pokemon or TCG or maybe some of the Disney cards that were out there. I can appreciate it's there for them. Even if we look specifically at the sports cards, one of the most tone-deaf things I saw on Twitter this past week was the fact that there was so much vintage there because, quote-unquote, nobody collects vintage. Nobody likes vintage. Well, I don't know if they missed the memo, but the National is pretty well known for being a very large vintage show, for having a vast variety of vintage cards. A lot of my good friends out there, they exclusively collect vintage. A lot of them collect a whole mix of things, both modern and vintage cards. They can appreciate the modern cards even if they don't collect vintage. They're not there complaining, oh, there's too much ultra modern. Some of them are, and I would say the same thing to them on the opposite end of the spectrum. But just because nobody in your little circle collects vintage doesn't mean that nobody's interested in it, because I know a lot of people there that picked up some incredible vintage cards, some cards that people have been after for a very long time, some grail cards in the words of some people out there. But just because it doesn't necessarily appeal to you doesn't mean that it shouldn't be on the show floor. Again, I thought that the balance between vintage and modern was very healthy at this show. It perhaps was one of the most balanced shows in terms of vintage versus modern that I have ever seen, quite frankly. On top of that, there were a lot of really rare cards in the room that I would go and walk around, and I wasn't necessarily interested at the price that the dealer had of that. I kind of made a mental note. But when I would come back the next day, those cards had sold. They sold for more than what I was willing to pay for them. They sold for more than 80 to 85% of the last sold price. And I saw a lot of people complaining about pricing. I said it earlier on in the video that I thought that the pricing of this National, while there were definitely people that were overpriced, was probably some of the most reasonable that I had seen at any National prior. There will always be people overpriced on stuff. Some booths that I'll walk right past because I know it's way overpriced. But hey, guess what? That's like that at every single show. It's going to happen no matter where you go. It can be your 20-table VFW Hall show back home or this one. That is always going to be the case. There will be people who are grossly overpriced. But there are also people who were fair with their prices. And fair prices doesn't mean 80 to 85% of the lowest sale that you can find. It might mean it's in the ballpark of what a card like that could generally expect to fetch in the open market. And at the end of the day, a card is only worth what someone is willing to pay. Just because it last sold for X amount doesn't guarantee that that is what the next one will go for. In some cases, that will be the all-time high sale. I'm sure there's some Desmond Ritter stuff that sold this time last year that will never reach those prices again. You're not guaranteed to get what it last sold for. And also, conversely, there's some stuff that sold at this show that will never be that price again. It will never be that low in our lifetimes. We don't know what that stuff is yet, but that's how the hobby works. It isn't always going to be at the last sale. And a card at the end of the day is only worth what someone is willing to pay. Nobody is strong-arming any of these people into paying these prices. People aren't dumb. You guys saw how bad the Wi-Fi was at this show. There were a lot of people checking comps on their phone. There is, at the palm of your hand at any given time, a way to check what things have sold for. Even if some of them are rudimentary, even if some of them aren't very elaborate, they don't give you as much information as some of the paid services out there, there is still ways to find what cards have sold for without having to put any money into some subscriptions or some apps. But if a card was worth what someone was willing to pay, can you fault a dealer for selling at that? And a lot of that has to tie into, this is the National Sports Collectors Convention, not the National Flippers Convention. For those upset that the dealers wouldn't leave them meat on the bone, for upset that the dealers didn't care that you were a breaker or whatever, for those upset that you need to make money off their cards, I don't know what to tell you, because the dealers are not there for that. And speaking to a lot of them after some of these guys left the table talking about how they need some meat on the bone or they need some room, guess what? A lot of these dealers are sick of it, because I asked them, is this stuff going on around the country? Because this is stuff that I deal with back home. A lot of them tell me yes. Yes, it is. We deal with this stuff and we're sick of it. That to me is not a good sign. Like, you want to be able to build these relationships with people because they'll remember it. They'll remember how you treated them. And you're only burning bridges before they're even fully constructed. And that to me it's a really dangerous game. Now, if you want to try to talk about how you need room and stuff, you can always try to LARP as a dealer at a trade night or whatever. There's places for that. But in terms of on the show floor, trying to get stuff for resale purposes and making that the dealer's problem, they weren't having it at this show. And quite frankly, I'm glad that they were still able to have record shows without really having to entertain those kind of comments. And take that from someone who was going there with the primary objective of finding cards for resale, which I did. And never once did I make it the dealer's problem that I need to make money on the cards. I paid a price that I was comfortable with, and they sold it to me at a price that they were comfortable selling it to me at. Now, sure, sometimes they know, especially if I'm wearing my Triple Crown shirt, what my game is and what I'm after, but it's never going to be their problem that I need to make money on this stuff. And I'll always repeat that until the end of time. That is something I firmly stand behind. But yeah, National Sports Collectors Convention, not the National Flippers Convention. I want to say, kind of with that rant aside, that those who complained about the show, yeah, there's definitely room for improvement there. I think there's some very valid criticisms that were made of this show, but if all you want to do is complain about it, I wonder why you even go to these things. Why are you looking to go to the one next year in Chicago? I do think a lot of these issues will probably be resolved there, but this is still a great show. There's a reason that a lot of people love this show and treat it as a vacation, treat it as an escape from the real world. It's a very important show to a lot of people out there, and I think that is sometimes lost on some people, especially if you're one of the weekend warriors who goes to shows every weekend. You might be a little bit numb to this, but the National is an incredible experience. A lot of it has to do with the people there. I know that's kind of cliche to say that it's always about the people, but it's true. Seeing some of my friends that I only see at this show, I didn't get to see them as much. And really, I think that's what was part of this show that made it not as special for me, is because I didn't get to hang out with some of my friends that I normally would get to spend more time with. A lot of that's just logistical stuff. It's how it panned out. Maybe that will be different next year, but that's just the way that it was this time around. And it's not just the friends I knew, but the friends I met there. I had so many people tell me that they watched the videos, that they have seen my stuff before. They appreciate what I do. They complimented me on my content. They told me, I really enjoy how you do this, or it's great to meet you. It's great to do a deal with you. That means the world to me. Things that, I can't necessarily get from behind a computer screen. It's one thing when someone leaves a comment. Don't get me wrong, I'm not unappreciative of the comments. But when someone comes up and they tell you like, hey, very good to meet you, keep doing what you're doing, it means a lot, especially with what happened with me the week after. If you don't know, I posted it up on Instagram, but I got scammed for $2,500. And that was very discouraging. Is it going to destroy me? No. Does it suck, and do I notice it's missing? Yeah, I do, especially when it was by a former friend or someone that you thought was a friend. It does sting, but I do keep those words of encouragement in the back of my head and try to think about those positive moments and those who I know have my back when the times get tough. And it'll be something that I can bounce back from, and it's not going to take away from anything that I experienced at the National this week. So huge thank you if you stayed through all of this. I just kind of wanted to tie this all up in one bow. I wanted to focus more so on the aspects of the show, the negotiations and all that through the first 4 parts, but I also wanted to make sure that I got these thoughts out there and give you my opinions. And if you disagree with them, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to agree with them. In fact, if you want to debate me in the comments, I'll entertain any kind of conversation you want to have. But for those of you who said hello, for those of you who made it special at the show a couple weeks ago in Cleveland, thank you so much. I'll be back soon with some more vlog content. It's going to be a very busy fall and winter this year. 2024, there's still a lot left to tell for this year's story and a lot more for me to put out on this channel. But I'll see you then. Take care, stay safe, be kind.